Welcome back to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
And we're here for the second of 3 shows that you recorded while in Germany.
That's right. Well, this is the show that we did in Germany, but actually in Switzerland.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we ended up moving around a fair bit. We ended up with an event in Zurich, which turns out is where Laurent Bugnion lives, so much the easier.
How cool is that?
Yeah, it was really good.
Well, anyway, we have a little better know framework before we get rolling, so this is a good one. Roll the music.
All right, dude, what do you got?
This is unbelievable. I just stumbled across this on GitHub. It's a system design primer, but it's essentially an entire systems class on one page.
What?
It's amazing. It's got flashcards, it's got diagrams, there's all sorts of resources that you can use to learn all about servers and load balancers and APIs and caches and databases and HTTP and DNS and DHCP and just everything about large-scale systems in one giant resource.
That's nice.
Flashcards for studying, design decks and exercise decks. Just unbelievable. So much stuff here.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So if you've got a few years to kill and you want to just refresh or learn all you can as fast as possible, this seems like a pretty good resource.
That's awesome, dude. I love it. Really cool.
There's even prepping for coding interviews. Like, there's so much thought that went into this resource. It's just boggles my mind.
So just actually how to do, now that you've got the design, how do you do the review?
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. So that's it. I mean, I could sit here and talk about this all day because there's so much good stuff, but just go check it out.
You need to check it out.
Pour yourself a cup of coffee.
Yeah, the link is in the show notes.
Yep.
Great find, dude.
Thanks. Who's talking to us, Richard?
Grabbed a comment off of show 1057, which we did with Laurent back in November of 2014. Mm-hmm. So a little on the old school side, but definitely, still Laurent. He was talking about Xamarin Forms in those early days of Xamarin Forms. And this comment comes from Alex Castles, who said, and this is admittedly 4 years ago, in this podcast, you mentioned people moving from Xamarin C# from Android and Java. As someone who did this, the story of why was mainly due to tooling support. I compared Eclipse and Android Studio, which was in very early release at the time, versus Xamarin Studio, and Xamarin was the stronger IDE. Eclipse and Android Studio were just awful, although I do think that Android Studio is better now.
Yeah.
And of course, this is 4 years ago, so everybody's progressed. The ability to do cross-platform was a bonus. I was just really interested in getting a complex Android app integrating with a lot of platform-specific APIs developed efficiently. Mm-hmm. And, I remember this conversation in those early days where, remember how fragmented the Android market was? And so one of the advantages of the hybrid development approaches was that it absorbed those variations in Android. Just made your life a little easier all around.
Yeah.
So, Alex, thank you so much for your comment. A copy of Music to Code By is on its way to you. And if you'd like a copy of Music to Code By, write a comment on the website at .netrocks.com or via any of our social media, because we publish every show to Google Plus and Facebook. And if you comment there and we read it on the show, we'll send you a copy of Music to Code By.
And also follow us on Twitter. He's at Rich Campbell. I'm at Carl Franklin. Send us a tweet. We learned how to read them on a GitHub-based system design primer.
With circles and arrows.
It's right. I learned what an API is. It's pretty awesome.
I don't think that's true. I'm pretty sure you had an idea what an API was before that.
No, I had a cursory knowledge, but until I did the deep dive, I didn't truly know.
There you go. Thought about it differently. I love it.
Well, anyway, let's roll your interview with Laurent from Zurich.
Hey, Zurich, it's .NET Rocks. And this is Richard Campbell doing one of these special interviews, traveling with the Telerik modern web tour. And we're towards the end of our day, get a chance to talk to my friend Laurent Bugnion. Hello, Laurent.
Hello, Richard. What's up?
No rest for the wicked, my friend. We've had a busy day today. I'm looking at your big bio, and it's too much work, man. You're crazy. So these days, you're a senior cloud developer advocate for Microsoft.
That's correct.
So you crossed over.
Yeah, pretty much a year ago. I'm going to celebrate my anniversary on campus next week.
Nice.
Yep.
But if we do the Wayback Machine, it's certainly something I talked about today. It is things like MVVM Light.
Yeah, that's...
I don't think we've ever done a show on that for all the things we've talked about over the years, and it's been a lot of shows. I don't think we've ever really talked about MVVM.
Yeah, we might have talked a little bit about that on the tablet show. I was trying to remember.
I should look it up.
Done one of those. But anyway, on .NET Rocks Never, no, and it's about 9 years in the making now, so yeah, it's been a while.
It's mature.
Yeah.
No, did you know your way around MVVM before Silverlight came along? I felt like Silverlight taught us about model view model.
Yeah, WPF really. Mostly what happened is that I was working for Siemens at the time, and when WPF came out in 2006, there was the first Mix conference, and Siemens sent me there, which was really fun for me because I was doing some web development before,
right?
And I was a little bit tired of that, and so I was kind of looking for a new job. And apparently, my boss heard that I was interviewing.
And that upset him.
Well, no, not really, but they wanted to keep me on, and so as an incentive, they sent me to Vegas, which was not bad, right? And so I flew there, and I was lucky enough to see the first Mix, and then later I went back. So I did actually all the Mix conferences, and I spoke at 3 of them.
Right.
But that changed my life literally. And in 2006, Microsoft showed XAML and Blend and WPF to the World Windows Presentation Foundation, and I was floored. I was so happy to see that when I came back home, I started blogging. So my blog started. I think probably 3 weeks after Mix, after I came back from Vegas.
Wow.
And because I was just pumped by the energy that there was in that room at the time.
That sort of level of inspiration.
Yeah.
That first Mix was electric.
It was fantastic.
It was so different than any other Microsoft show I've been to.
It was, yeah. It was a lot more on UX, user experience. It was called what was it called? The web, something, the modern web.
The modern web, I think.
Yeah,
exactly
I think
right.
so. Yeah, something like that.
And so I've collected up a lot of the graphics and things from those early shows, and they're so low resolution because of the resolution of screens. I've actually had to give them to graphic artists and have them remake them in higher resolution versions. So I have a high resolution version of the Mix 06 graphic. It's just fake.
Yeah, I'm sure. and they had really a whole imagery and a whole. Everything was pretty much different.
Such a design aesthetic to it.
Totally. And the people who organized that were also not the usual people, basically. And what I loved at Mix is that it was really a smaller conference than PDC or something, right? I think the first one was probably 1,500 people only.
Yeah. Small for a Microsoft conference.
Small for Microsoft conference, but still, the cool thing is that really they had this concept of launch, which we now with my team implemented at Build, and basically it's a place where you can meet the speakers, where you can have a whole lot of whiteboard discussions with the people, and that was new at the time, really. And so it was extremely electric, and my life changed that day, I can say, because I came back, I started blogging about 6, 7, 8 months later, I got the MVP because of the blog.
Right.
My first MVP in 2007. And then basically that's where my career, I could say, kind of took a turn, right? And then I came back to Siemens and I told them, this WPF thing is really serious. We need to look into it. And
these were early days for WPF.
Oh, yeah. It was basically WPF had been shown to the public at PDC in 2005.
Yep.
And it had been released at Mix in 2006. So in April, I think March, April, like that. And so
that was .NET 3.
It was .NET 3, yeah. 3.0, I think, or 3.5.
3.5 would be 2008.
Yeah. So that was
only because I'm working on that bloody book that I have all these numbers in my head now.
I'm sure, yeah. So that was cool. And so I told my division of Siemens that, yes, we should definitely look into that. And then they were very generous to give me about a year to do some prototyping work, basically.
Wow. And
research.
Because there was not a lot of guidance in those early days.
There was none. Yeah. And our guidance was pretty much reading the blogs of the WPF team. And so we had the WPF team on one hand, and then we had a bunch of really clever guys working for a small firm called Identity Mine. Little firm. Yeah. And most of them had actually come from the Avalon team, so from the WPF team, right? So people like Nathan Dunlap, who was a designer, and Jonathan Russ, who was a developer on the WPF team, and a lot of other people. And we contacted Microsoft, Siemens contacted Microsoft and said, hey, we look more into that WPF thing. Can you recommend us a firm? And they recommended us Identity Mine.
Okay.
And so I went to Seattle to talk to them. We sent a bunch of people to educate themselves on WPF. And we started basically a collaboration. And since back then, nobody was really doing... we didn't have guidance or anything on WPF, so we were all reading each other's blogs basically. And since my blog was on this kind of thing, they started noticing, oh, there is somebody who's not Microsoft who's actually doing this kind of thing,
talking about it.
Interesting, right? Yeah. And so I started going to Redmond, being invited there, and talking to people like Scott Gu, who was leading that at the time, right? And Ian Ellison Taylor and Brad Abrams, of course, and all those people about, hey, look, we are looking at this model. And the model that was interesting for me was, I want to have my designers in Princeton. They were in Princeton at the time. I want to have developers we had them in Chicago, in Princeton, in Zurich, in Milano, and in Pune, in India. And I want everybody to be able to work independently from each other. So how can I do that? And Blend was playing a big role in that, because the idea was that the designers would basically do the design of the application in Blend. And
again, Blend was brand new. And this idea that you would have a separate set of designer skills from development skills, and they would be integrated in some way.
Yeah, it was totally new. And so we went ahead, and with Identity Mine's help, we actually, looked into Blend. What are they doing in Blend?
Right.
Because they were really rendering code. And so that was kind of new in Blend. They were really taking your code and running it, right? And so you are able to basically run your code in a special mode that I call design mode,
right?
And to create what I call design data. And in order to do that, you had to architect your application in a way which was basically MVVM, but except I didn't know it was called that.
Right.
And so we did that. And then at Mix 07, Microsoft called me and said, hey, we need to introduce you to someone. And I was like, okay, so that's cool. And so we had lunch with a very, very clever guy called John Gossman, who was the architect of Blend and one of the major architects of WPF. And that's when John told me, oh, by the way, what you're doing here, I call that model view model.
Right.
And that was basically his invention, if you want. I know there is some discussions on who invented what, and Bob Martin, came with presentation model, and it's very similar. But basically, John Gossman did MVVM, and he did it in a practical manner, in a production way for Blend. And so suddenly I was like, oh, now I get it. That's why it works, right? It's because you did that from the start.
He had that architectural pattern in mind with the implementation of WPF. So
totally.
We'd be able to separate those things. Okay.
And so around the time, we started communicating with a few people who were very active in the WPF world, like people like Josh Smith, for example, Carl Schifflet, Mark Smith, who is now a Microsoft employee through Xamarin, right? He's the dean of the Xamarin University. And I don't want to offend anybody, but basically a bunch of people, Marlon Gresh in Malta, and really a lot of people there. And then we had a private mailing list with Marlon founded at the time and called that the WPF Disciples. And so it was like, nice. Oh my God, Avalon is our religion. And so that was really funny. And then we started talking a lot about architecture and how should we do things. And then somebody mentioned the idea of, hey, maybe we should try to do, because of the decoupling, we should try to do a mediator pattern. So basically mediator is like it's like a pub sub model where you say, okay, somebody's subscribing to messages and somebody's publishing messages, and in a decoupled manner.
And the mediator basically makes sure right message gets the right place.
Correct.
Right.
And I thought that was really a good idea, and so I implemented a version of that I called the Messenger, and that was pretty much the first component of MVVM Light, of what became MVVM Light.
Okay.
And my idea...
And it's interesting that you didn't set out to make
No.
Okay.
No, totally. I mean, my idea at the time was that I was blogging a lot on those things, and I wanted to have a set of components that I can explain once and then tell people, hey, okay, so I'm going to show you an application of the messenger that you can use to do this and that. And by the way, if you don't know the messenger, go and check that article, which is explaining to you what a messenger is, right?
Right.
And so that was the idea at first. And then I went to Seattle once, and Josh Smith, in between I had joined Identity Mine, actually, in 2008.
Then they were based in Seattle.
Yeah,
but
they
you were
extended
still
me an
living
offer. I was living in Switzerland. I was
Okay.
their first European employee, so I stayed their only European employee for about 4 years. And so we were communicating a lot. I was going to Seattle all the time. And at the time, we also happened to hire Josh Smith, who was very, very clever guy. And he was, that's a funny anecdote, but he was living in the Harbor Steps in Seattle, nice building with a pool. And so he told me, hey, let's go and take a swim. I'm like, okay, cool. So we went there, and in the pool, I remember we talked about, so what do you want to do with this thing that you're developing? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't want it to become this big thing. I'm probably just going to publish it on Codeplex at the time, open source, and then kind of forget about it. And it took a different turn because when I published it, actually people started using it, which I was not expecting. And then I started getting really requests for, how do you do that? Or
what about
how
this? What about this? I mean, the best kind of using it is then
Yeah.
now they see what it's missing.
Yeah, exactly. And so I started adding a few things, and but really the idea was I didn't want to do a framework. That's why I call it a toolkit. In the sense that you can choose. I mean, you can choose the tool that you want, but if you don't want to use everything, I'm not prescribing anything. You can replace components with your own, or you can use something else, or you can build on top of it. Basically, it's up to you. And then after that, I thought, I need a logo, and I had a good friend who was a designer in Geneva and told me, I can't actually code, but I want to contribute. It's an open source project. I want to contribute. So
Sure.
he did a logo for free, which I thought was really cool. And that's how it took off, basically. And when Silverlight came out,
The key was the logo.
the key was logo. I mean, you need to brand stuff if you want stuff to be...
It's for people to actually pick up the banner and run
Exactly.
with it.
So now
And
the logo
Laurent,
thing...
give me one moment there for this very important message. Save the date for .NET Conf 2018, September 12th through 14th. .NET Conf is a free 3-day virtual developer event co-organized by the .NET community and Microsoft. Over the course of 3 days, you can enjoy a wide selection of live sessions that feature speakers from the community and .NET product teams. These are the experts in their field, and .NET Conf is a chance to learn, ask questions live, and get inspired for your next software project. You will learn to build for web, mobile, cloud, desktop, games, services, libraries, and more for a variety of platforms and devices, all with .NET. There are sessions for everyone, no matter if you are starting out or a seasoned engineer. Expect presentations on .NET Core and ASP.NET Core, C#, F#, Azure, Visual Studio, Xamarin, and much more. Head to www.dotnetconf.net. That's .netconf.net to learn more and tune in. And we're back. It's Laurent Bugnion here with me, Richard Campbell. We're in Zurich on the Modern Web Tour.
So are we?
Yeah, and talking a little history of MVVM Light.
Yep.
And I was teasing you about having a good logo, but it does make a lot of sense that for people to get excited about something, you've got to have a sort of message. And did you have a vision at that point about what it would be or what it was really about?
It kind of started, I guess, when I noticed that people started using it.
Right.
I think it really started. So like I mentioned, right, I implemented it for WPF, but when Silverlight came out, and I noticed, I can easily port it to Silverlight because since it was lightweight, porting it to another version of .NET, which was what Silverlight was not a big deal.
I mean, is that 2009? Because it could have been the first. Yeah. The first version of Silverlight was just JavaScript anyway.
Yeah, so Silverlight 1 was just JavaScript. Yeah. So Silverlight 2 was really when it started. And so I did that really fast. I think pretty much at Mix, I did that, in fact, the port.
While you were there.
Yeah, while I was there. And because I got some, since I was an MVP, I had some previews of Silverlight 2 already, so I was able to do some preparation.
And it was derived from WPF anyway.
It was super easy to port, no problem at all. And then I started noticing that MVVM Light was more than a design data framework type thing, but it was actually about cross-platform compatibility, because since you can decouple, you could take your WPF view and replace it with a Silverlight view. WPF was using Windows and Silverlight was using Pages, so the navigation model was different. It didn't really matter because as soon as you had your view model and everything in the view model, bindings are easy to do, so you just redo your UI and then you're good to go, right?
And this is when you talk about MVCs and MVVMs, it's about exactly that. Oh, you want to switch platforms, so you just worry about
no problem at all.
Don't worry about the rest.
So making it compatible was really easy, and then even later, Windows Phone came out, and so Windows Phone was yet another platform. But again, porting it was super easy, basically, because as soon as it's .NET, as soon as what I do is reflection, there is a bit of reflection going on, but some lightweight reflection. It's not a problem, and so basically it's easy to support pretty much everywhere.
And the first, especially Phone 7, it was like a lightweight version of Silverlight.
Kinda, yeah, like a bastardized version of Silverlight.
They just got the little things running.
Yeah, the errors were cryptical because they were all unmanaged errors, and so you would get those
not
weird
implemented
numbers.
errors.
No, even worse, like the error, 0x, blah blah blah, right?
Nice.
And you don't know what it is, and so that was fun, and that was cool. And then at the time also, Sams reached out to me to ask me if I wanted to write a Silverlight 2 book. And I said yes, and it was kind of a good decision, but also a bad one because, oh my God, writing a book,
as you know, a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a lot of
work.
I'm
already at the bloody book phase, right?
Yeah.
I'm still nowhere.
Yeah, the writing is kind of fun. After that, you have to edit the book, and that's what's not really fun. But anyway, it became, I can say that really Silverlight took a big, it was quite important for me. And that's also at the time where I sat with Scott Guthrie in Zurich. In fact, I think the last time he was in Zurich was in 2007 or 8, maybe 9, I'm not sure. And anyway, and we sat down together and talked about that, and basically became, well acquainted, I would say. And knowing Scott Guthrie at Microsoft is always helpful,
But that was then that apparent at the time. I mean, today it's ridiculous.
It was apparent that he was very clever and that he would go places, but
But he's gone a long way. My goodness.
Yeah, he did. And so basically the cross-platform story became super important to me. And later when Xamarin, before the acquisition, so I'm talking before 2016, when Xamarin was still an independent firm, when Xamarin took off, and I think it was with Xamarin 3 at the time, and started being really usable from a tooling standpoint, etc., then it only made sense for me to actually port MVVM Light to that as well.
So when would that have been? Because
2014.
Yeah. Okay. So because the first time we sort of saw the Android version was 2011.
Yes.
But it was pretty raw.
It was raw, and I tried it out, and then I told my firm I don't think we can use that yet.
It's not ready.
So
the guy was writing his own version of C# and his own version of the framework. They were taking on a huge
challenge. The tooling was
channel.
especially rough. Yeah, the tooling was really bad. It was unstable and horrible. And so I told them I don't think we should do that. And I think I did the port in 2013, and 2014 I remember that date because Xamarin invited me to speak at Evolve, which was their big conference.
That was their show,
like their mix, right?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, and so I did the port, and then I saw that really the download numbers were taking off like crazy. Mostly because since it's about compatibility, a lot of people had Silverlight stuff at the time was still more or less around, and WPF stuff, and then they were saying, oh, okay, I have a view model, I can actually take the view model, put it in Xamarin, and work with that in iOS and in Android, and
Absolutely.
that was kind of, and again, right, redo the view, and you're done.
And we are walking past the thing, which was the sort of quote unquote death of Silverlight.
Yeah.
But what did you see? I mean, admittedly, you're an employee now, but we're talking before you were an employee.
I talk very freely of that time because what I saw is that
this is
basically
TDC
Bob Mulia made a comment about shifting strategies and the internet starting getting crazy, and it was a weekend. I remember that because basically the MVPs, I was a Silverlight MVP at the time. There was actually a Silverlight MVP group, and I was one of the first. I think I was number 3 or 4. He was Justin Angel at the time. Do you remember Justin?
I do.
Yeah, cool guy. But man, he had the idea of doing a Silverlight MVP group, so we did that, and it was really good because we were really close from the product group, and we had all the previews, like super early previews. And back then it was only maybe like 30-40 people maximum.
And they were iterating so fast.
Really fast.
New bits every few weeks.
All the time. Yeah. They were basically back then the innovation was in Silverlight because since they were releasing a lot faster than .NET, they were able to do new things all the time.
I think back on that time as this was an example for how Microsoft was going to work today.
Yeah,
Like
totally.
right now, when we think about how fast the studio team is pushing out versions, how quickly stuff is appearing in the cloud,
Azure, yeah.
that was what Silverlight was like in 2010.
It was a totally different way for them to work, and being also independent from Windows. That was new, right? Before the .NET, what was really slow in the .NET versions is that they had to release a new version of Windows pretty much, or in other words, they were releasing a new version of .NET when there was a new version of Windows.
Right.
And of course, that was slow, and Silverlight was totally independent from that, so they could release whenever they wanted.
And they did.
And they did, and that was new. So it was a good time, but the strategy shift happened on a weekend, and of course, nobody at Microsoft was working, and so we started reaching out. All the MVPs started reaching out to our contacts. I wrote to Scott Guthrie a few times, and God knows that Scott is fast in answering email, but there was a lot going on, and we didn't have answers, and so that was a little bit scary, and I think we still suffer a little bit from that time in terms of trust of the developers in what we do, especially on the client.
I mean, the interesting thing is that Silverlight continued to be released into the following year. But
it did, and there was even an event, like they did a developer event at the time where they released a new version of Silverlight, and then it was basically the predecessor of the Connect event that we have now. I think it was actually in New York, so it was probably the first Connect,
even if it wasn't called that.
It was not called that. I think it was called the Silverlight Developer Day or something like that. It was a remote conference, and basically the purpose of that conference was to say, hey, we are not abandoning Silverlight. It's still there. But basically the writing was on the wall, and people started flocking to alternative stuff. Like Knockout was coming out around the time. And basically Knockout, Steve Sanderson, who is now doing Blazor, very clever guy, right? I think you talked to him on the show. Awesome guy. And he saw what WPF and Silverlight was doing with binding, and thought, we should do the same in JavaScript.
Just and straight up to the browser rather than having to be in the plugin.
Yeah, and so he said, okay, let's do a binding. Basically what Knockout was, he was a binding engine for HTML and then the JavaScript view model, right? He was kind of the idea. And that was a pretty good idea. And, the Angular team noticed it and basically did the same thing for Angular 1.
Well, I always felt like Knockout was the first that, Eisenberg with Durandal and eventually Aurelia.
Yeah, well, I mean, Eisenberg, of course, was very influential at the time because Rob Eisenberg developed back then Caliburn. And Caliburn was a major competitor of MVVM Light, but with a very different approach, much more prescriptive approach. And a lot of it was done under the cover. Like, for example, if you had a view, you just had to name your view model with the same name, except view model suffixed. And then it would take it automatically and use it as data context automatically, which I didn't like. For me, I understood the idea, and and Rob Eisenberg is a very, very clever guy, so definitely a lot of respect. But I saw that there are some developers who like that, but there are also other developers who like things expressed more clearly, right? Explicitly is what I was looking for.
And there's these two philosophies. Like you said it right off the bat, you intended it as a toolkit, use the parts you want.
Totally.
And sort of that open model where Rob's approach was, hey, you're coming in here. I'm very opinionated about how this is going to happen. You're all in with me or don't bother. One or the other. And I think both methods work.
Totally. And our experience was that it was really a 50-50 split pretty much. So he had about 50% of the devs and I have the other 50%.
Right.
And then there was a few people using back then Prism. Of course, Prism is totally different now, so we can't even compare. But Prism was kind of composite framework at the time. And
what was the code name on that? Because I remember we did a show around it. Was that something like Alexandria?
Oh, yeah, that could be.
It might have been it.
Yeah.
I could probably go back and find the show. But we did one. And you're right. And in some ways, I loathe when Microsoft reuses names because they did completely reboot what became Prism into this to another thing entirely. But it's still out there today.
Yeah, and now it's really good. So now it's a very good alternative. Back then, it was just very heavy, and I don't think a lot of people liked using it.
"Quote unquote" enterprisey. Right?
Yeah, it was. But I think at some point I noticed that I had quote unquote arrived because I was on the call. I happened to be on the call with Identity Mine with Microsoft, and they didn't know that I was on the call. We just had a bunch of people. It was one of those, like 20 people conference call or whatever. And somebody from Microsoft, I don't remember who that was, but mentioned, so Prism, we need to be careful because there is this thing called MVVM Light, which is actually the main competitor of Prism. And I'm like, dude, no, it's not.
It's not.
It's really not. I mean, I'm taking totally different
He
road.
didn't know you were on the call.
And he didn't know I was on the call. And
That's
so I
very
kind
funny.
of laughed. I was on mute. So, and that's when I noticed that, wow, that thing is actually taking off more than I thought. And of course, Microsoft knew about that because they had NuGet. They had all the download stats, right? And so they knew exactly where to look. So that was interesting. And because of the lightness of it also, they used it for a lot of things. Like, for example, when they the conversion to PCL was actually made to Portable Cost Library was actually made by Microsoft, by the PCL team, because
for
they reached
MVVM Light.
Yeah, they reached out to me and they said, "Hey, you have a real life project. Can we take it and put it on PCL? Because like this, we will see what works and what doesn't." Yeah. And so I said, "Yes, please." It's free work.
That's certainly a validation of the model.
Yeah.
Hey, Richard.
Yeah, buddy.
Guess what time it is now?
Time to do another one of those crazy trips back to the studio for something?
Yeah, right. It's time to call an action of bad humor in the view model of this wonderful interview and trigger red warning labels all over the interface.
It's very silly.
I'm just trying to play along. It's actually time to give away a free conference pass to Tech Bash, October 2 through 5, and up to 4 nights at the Kalahari Resort in Pocono Manor, Pennsylvania for this event. Compliments of Progress Telerik. To register, visit techbash.dotnetrocks.com. But first, let me tell you about the most comprehensive developer toolkit for building modern apps on the market today, Telerik DevCraft. With more than 1,100 Telerik.NET and Kendo UI JavaScript components and controls, you can easily build modern, high-performant web, mobile, and desktop apps, as well as chatbots. The tool set also includes reporting solutions, automated testing, and productivity tools, and comes with a range of support options. New this year is a free online training program for all license holders. With this, alongside thousands of demos with source code, comprehensive docs, and a full assortment of Visual Studio templates, you'll be up and running with Progress Telerik and Kendo UI tools in no time. Download a free 30-day trial today at telerik.com/download.
All right, buddy. Who's our winner?
Today's winner is Jeff Tucker.
Congratulations, Jeff.
Yeah.
Golf clap for you.
Jeff just got a free conference pass to Tech Bash in October and up to 4 nights at the Kalahari Resort in Pocono Manor just for being a member of the .NET Rocks fan club. And if you want to be a member, go to .NETRocks.com, click on the big Get Free Stuff button, answer a few questions, and join up. We have thousands of members all over the world. In every show, we like to give away stuff from our sponsors. And every December, we're giving away a $5,000 technology shopping spree to one lucky member of the fan club. But you have to sign up to win. And Richard, I take it that you asked Laurent what he would do with his $5,000.
Why, yes, I did. And so now it's up to me, Laurent, to ask you this question. If you had $5,000 to spend on technology, what would you buy?
I'm sure you know.
You'd buy a drone because you still are missing your drone.
Yes, I crashed my drone.
Was it a Phantom?
No, it was a Mavic Pro.
It was a Mavic Pro. And, and you hit a wire. Like if I'd asked you to hit the wire, you couldn't hit it.
I couldn't have done it. Yeah, and
you were a long way away when you hit it.
I was in Austria in Tyrol, and I was flying to film a stupid waterfall. It was really beautiful. It was just at the snow melt. And I was going to Germany with my bike, and I had my drone, and I saw the waterfall. I'm like, oh, I have to film that.
Nice.
And I go there, and there was a stupid transport cable with markings, but the markings were kind of you
missed them
below. And suddenly I was looking at my screen, and I see the cable, and I see the thing hitting it, and started spiraling, and it fell down in the valley down there. Basically.
So you couldn't get to it.
Back then I couldn't because there was still a lot of snow there.
Sure.
It was probably about 500-600 meters away from me on the other side of the valley. And second of all, I didn't have time also and all that, so I just left it there. So if somebody goes to Tyrol and find a drone with my name on it, well, you can have it. I'm going to buy the next model.
Oh yeah, there's a model coming up.
I think so. I don't know. They had an event planned and they delayed it, but I'm waiting for that event. Yeah.
Because if nothing else, the existing models will go down in price. But $5,000 is a
Exactly.
lot to spend on a drone. I mean, you wouldn't be talking about a Mavic in that.
Yeah, accessories.
range.
No, I would still talk about the Mavic because
Yeah.
what I love about the Mavic is the portability.
Yeah.
And so I was really literally able to take it with me all around the world. So I went to Iceland with it. I went to Philippines with it. I went on boats in Philippines in lagoons, and I made videos there. And flying with it, like flying on a plane with it, is a pleasure because it's so small. It's smaller than the DSLR.
Camera rig, right.
bag, and so you can literally take it with you on on your belt. It doesn't even count as a carry-on. Basically, it's like it's just on your belt, basically. So I would probably buy that. And I know you have a Spark.
I have a Spark. Yeah, I got for
there
my
is also
birthday.
the Air. I still like the Mavic Pro in terms of distance and all that. So I think I will probably go with that.
And whatever the new Pro is.
Whenever
Because
the
you
new
go,
Pro is.
the commercial ones are bigger and more powerful. They just take up a lot of room.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you have to carry them. They're also quite expensive. Like, I mean, the Phantom would be okay, but the Phantom is just big to carry.
Sure.
So you need a bag.
But it's a couple of $1,000s. But you're right. I mean, even though
Yeah.
I think the Spark Basic is like $500.
Yeah,
by the
after
time
that, you want to add batteries.
Yeah,
and all
you
that,
want the bigger controller and with the longer range, and
Yeah.
you want the batteries and the chargers and so
Yeah,
forth.
and
you're
I
at
also have
$1,000.
I also have a dedicated screen for it, which is $700-800 like that, but it's brighter
Okay.
and it's
meant for outdoors.
yeah, it's
rather
made by
than you-
DJI also, so it's also not you're not depending on your phone or whatever. You can just use that screen. So I would probably buy a bigger one, etc., etc. So I
Right.
think it adds on, but it's cool. And other than that, we start speaking at conferences a lot in my team, and we always love to invite people. So maybe I would use just a few $100 to invite people to conferences or whatever. That's always fun.
That's
like,
always a good way.
Yeah, minorities and all
It's
that.
an interesting
yeah.
idea to put aside some money to bring in. You're seeing this more and more in conferences.
Yeah, we do. So Microsoft, my team has budget for that. So now what we do is that we tell people when we speak at conferences, we tell them, hey, look, we will pay for ourselves, but the money that you would invest in us, Microsoft is going to pay for my coming, like
Right.
my planes and my hotels and all that. But that money, I'd like you to use it to invite somebody who couldn't afford to come otherwise.
Interesting.
So that's something we do. And now we start seeing other conferences, like we just heard from the Caribbean Developer Conference, for example, in Punta Cana. Great destination, but it's not about the destination. It's about what they do. And they just told us that each speaker can invite 10 people of their choice.
Nice.
And minorities, people. I want to try to reach out to local people who can't necessarily afford a big conference,
Sure.
like local developers, and tell them, hey, come, on us, right?
Be part of this.
So I love these type of things. Yeah, it's really cool.
No, we talk about diversity in the speaker cadre, in the group of speakers, but you really want diversity in the audience as well.
As well, yeah, and we all know that we have a problem with that in
Yeah.
our profession, right?
we can do better.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I do. I'm amused because I know so much of this story, but I don't think we've ever really talked about on the show about this sort of progression of MVVM Light and the role that it played. And so we got to the point where you moved over to looking at how it worked with Xamarin. Well, why was MVVM Light important in the Xamarin story?
So, I asked myself at first, does it even make sense? Because the thing is that the UI, the way that you do UI, and I'm not talking about Xamarin Forms here, where the Xamarin Forms team came a little bit later and did their thing.
Xamarin before Xamarin Forms.
Yeah, Jason Smith and all that. And they did data binding and all that. But on iOS and Android, you don't even have a data binding engine. The way that they do UI is really native iOS UI, native Android UI. And this is an MVC approach, right? But I thought after a lot of discussions and thoughts, and back then there was another, basically a fork of MVVM Light that somebody took and made something called MVVM Cross.
Okay.
And MVVM Cross originally is a fork of MVVM Light.
Interesting. And I'm sure we've had them on the show too.
Yeah, you probably did. It's a very well-known framework in the Xamarin space, but it is again a prescriptive framework, a little bit the equivalent of what Caliburn was for for XAML, for Windows.
Stuart Lodge
XAML.
is the name I was
Yeah,
thinking
Stuart
for.
Lodge was a guy that I talked to a lot. I think he's less active now, but there are still a lot of people active in that space. And he created a data binding engine for that basically. And so basically he was able to do some native iOS, native Android UI, but data bind to a view model. And I really liked this model, but at the same time, when I looked at the binding engine, there were a few things that I didn't totally like. just like ways to do things or maybe style or whatever. And so I decided to write my own, and I did. And then from the moment where you have a data binding engine, then MVVM makes a lot of sense. And it also made a lot of sense in terms of unit testing and, cross-platform. Like you could, if you use MVVM in Xamarin Android and Xamarin iOS, you can share code with Windows, for example. Right. And so immediately you have a lot more code that you can share. Instead of 50% maybe out of the box, you could go to 80%, and it's a lot, right? It's a big difference.
I always thought that the separation of the MVVM model meant that the model and the view model were probably completely shareable code, and the view was sort of your platform-specific piece.
Completely, that's totally the idea, and with a nice decoupling between those. And and then we moved on to Xamarin, and later Xamarin Forms came out, and they had their own type of engine just because they didn't want to have dependency on anything.
Sure.
But the engine they had, a lot of the code actually comes from MVVM Light, or at least is inspired from MVVM Light. So basically you can just swap their component with MVVM Light if you want. But they do have a data binding engine, so that work was done, so that was good, etc., etc. And so basically you open the door to more platforms. And since now you have, WebAssembly and platforms like Uno, for example. Uno is very interesting for me because the developer is an MVP, so I know him. We talked, and so when he showed me Uno, or when I saw Uno, rather, I reached out and I was like, hey, your thing is really cool. I like it. And Uno is basically running Windows XAML, UWP XAML as a UI. And they have data binding. And so I'm like, oh, what would it take to put MVVM Light on that? And he said, well, let me see. And he came back, I think, 2 days later, and he told me, what's your best sample? And I'm like, okay. So I show him on GitHub the sample. And again, 2-3 days pass, and he came back and said, hey, look on this URL. And I had my sample running in the web, in WebAssembly. And he had just to change a few things in Uno, basically, to change the ways that the binding was working on. I'm not sure exactly what he changed. And that was it, right? And so, again, right, the same idea, saying, okay, now we have C# code running on multiple platforms. So we have, Windows 10, we have Windows proper with WPF, Windows Desktop with WPF. We have, the new Silverlight, in quotes, WebAssembly or
Blazor,
whatever.
Yeah.
Blazor, of course, is using HTML, so you couldn't work in the same manner. But I'm sure we can figure something out. Probably it could be possible to at least have the view models there.
The Uno guys were literally taking the stuff they developed to do UWP related work and pushed it into WebAssembly.
Pushed it in WebAssembly. You also have a show about that, right?
Yes,
I listened to that.
We did talk about it.
With Jerome and his boss. And this is a very exciting time, basically. And the cool thing is that the model applies to really everything. So we mentioned already Angular with this idea of decoupling and the binding system and all that. And that was really a good idea that took origin in 2005, 2006, or even before that when they started developing WPF. And it's nice to see that spread out to many technologies. I love that.
Do you feel like they fragmented XAML, they made XAML harder than it needed to be? Because we talked about a lot of different flavors, and they weren't the same to each other.
Yeah, I know you and I talked about that, and there is a little bit of that, but at the same time, for me, the view is a very thin layer, I would say. And so I'm not totally, to be honest, I'm not so interested. Before I joined Microsoft, and now I'm doing a lot more cloud stuff because, of course, I'm a cloud developer advocate.
Sure.
So I'm a little bit less active on the client. But before that, I was working for a user experience agency, right? Sure. And our philosophy was to say, hey, whatever platform we go on, we want to be as native as possible for the view.
Yes.
Now we want to share code for the
but I'm willing to commit heavily to the view.
Right. And why did we want that? Is because we wanted to tell the designers, you don't have to worry about the technology. You just do an iOS design, an Android design, a Windows design, and we'll worry about adapting it and about being as pixel perfect as possible. So that was kind of what we are doing. Now with Xamarin Forms, of course, it's a different approach.
Sure.
The approach there is to say, hey, let's do a basic UI, like basic in the sense, like a basis UI, I would say. And then after that, it's going to be rendered, and then you can polish it. So it's a different approach. But when you work with designers, they want pixel perfection.
Every time.
And that's when you need to know with native.
And when you're talking pixel perfection, you're talking looking properly like a native iOS app?
Yeah.
Or do you fall more on the Facebook it should be the same app across all of the platforms.
So those are the two approaches.
Sure.
And I think the Facebook approach, Facebook can afford that, but others can't necessarily, and there is an acceptance issue. So
there's sort of this basic line that says, you're not Facebook.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you will see some people pay attention to these kind of details, even implicitly, even without consciously knowing that, but they feel that, it's not what I'm used to, right? Mm-hmm. And so for some UI, and then after that, we go into even more complex UX like HoloLens,
right,
or VR, right, or all these kind of things where suddenly even the gestures are different, and so there you need to be native. You can't be anything else because the gestures are just not going to work otherwise.
No. It's a different UI paradigm entirely. It's tough to think about it.
It is, yeah. And so what I like is having a view which is as native as possible and as thin as possible. That's why I like the Xamarin Classic approach, I would say. But Xamarin Forms at the same time is also interesting, and it's all matter. At this point, it's almost a philosophical question, I would say. So for me, the XAML fragmentation, it's kind of a pain because you have to learn something new, and who likes that, right? But at the same time,
your sort of reflexes are wrong. You're going to a set of objects that aren't there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, correct. And ways to architect your app and all that. But really, the architecture is going to remain the same. What changes is details. And I think the details are, I'm okay. We have now tools who help us, like designer tools and things like that. And also, I mean, we have to see that the changes make sense. I mean, they are not changes just for changes. When Microsoft made changes to the Windows 10, back then Windows 8 XAML, their idea is that we can reach a lot better performances by doing that, and so that made sense, right? Because WPF, it's a super powerful platform, but it is heavy, and so it was not optimized at the time. Yeah,
too complex.
So I can understand that. I can live with that, I would say.
2014 build.
Yeah.
The .NET Foundation, and you were one of the founding members.
Yeah, I was. I had the MVVM Light logo. We talked about that on the big screen at Build, which was very fun.
Did you get on stage too?
I didn't, but they mentioned the project and all that, and so
I was cheering for you, man.
Oh yeah, it was
exciting.
Fun. Yeah, it was the very first non-Microsoft project into the foundation, and I think it's again a little bit the same thing. They called me and they told me, hey, your thing is small enough that we are not really threatened by it. I want to say that, but it was Martin Woodward at the time who was leading the foundation. Who was leading that, and he reached out and he said, hey, look, we love MVVM Light. It's one of the most downloaded project. Ever.
Have you left CodePlex at that point?
No, I was still on CodePlex.
Oh, wow.
Mostly I had a reason for that, is that I prefer Mercurial to Git. I'm one of those guys.
You're one of those guys.
Yeah, and CodePlex was supporting Mercurial and Git, and GitHub obviously was supporting only Git. And so I stayed on CodePlex until it died. I was one of the last. I switched off the light when I left.
You were refreshing the page until it wouldn't refresh anymore. You're that guy.
They wrote to me at some point and they said, hey, we are closing down, man. You need to do something. I'm like, okay. So I spent a weekend porting everything. So now it's on GitHub, and I'm happy about the move. I mean, I'm okay. But I did like Mercurial. I think Git is just too complicated.
I spent time in Mercurial. I spent time in Subversion. Now I've spent time in Git.
Yeah, back then I had Visual Source Safe, so I'm not complaining about Git. VSS, man.
Yeah. What does it mean to be in the foundation? Like, is it any more work for you?
No, not at all. In fact, they're actually helping me. So, a few things they do is, just in terms of promotion and stuff like that, it's interesting to be there. But mostly they would help if I decided to stop. I think that's really what was interesting for me. And the main reason why I said yes was that they will help me find a successor if I should decide to give it up, which, I'm not that young anymore.
None of us are.
No.
But how much work do you do on MVVM Light?
Not as much as I used to, and especially since I moved to my new role where I'm like super excited about, I'm even talking like a Microsoftie now, super excited.
I hear that.
I'm really excited about those, the new services we have and WebAssembly also and all the ASP.NET Core thing. And I just spent quite quite a lot of time taking my personal website and putting it, and my blog and putting it on Azure. And so I have a little bit less time to do on MVVM Light, but also MVVM Light is very stable.
I was just thinking, it's not that you're not working on it, it's that it's kind of done. It does its job.
Kinda. I have a few IDs. I have a few pull requests from time to time, especially since I moved to GitHub. I have a bunch of, it's funny because one day I get, pretty much every day I get an email, and then it's like, request, why doesn't this work? And my philosophy now is, okay, let's just wait 2 hours, and 2 hours later I get to close. Oh, I found out how to do it.
Exactly. You're watching the learning process in the form of issues.
Yeah, or I was wrong, and then close. And so, okay, that's cool. Checked, right? Nice. I don't need to work. No, but seriously, I'd love to invest a little bit more work on it, and I do it by burst. So basically, suddenly I have a burst of activity where I say, okay, now I'm going to port it. The last big burst was porting it to .NET Standard.
Right.
And the port to .NET Standard was awesome. I learned so much about what .NET Standard is.
Yeah, I got to think it makes you a better Azure advocate to have that stuff deeply in your mind.
Oh, yeah, totally. And in fact, today we had a presentation where I showed ASP.NET Core, and I used part of what I learned, porting MVVM Light to do that, because it's the same type of thing. And Core and .NET Standard is all about compatibility and cross-platform and all that. And so it just made sense to put MVVM Light on .NET Standard as well.
I just find it fascinating that you've sort of been at the forefront with this project, because porting to the PCLs was going to be our solution to portability. Yeah. And then it had that n/n-1 problem as the number of platforms that proliferated, and PCL became unmanageable. Yeah. Standard is the workaround to that.
Well, I mean, it's more than a workaround. In a sense, I see that as a solution to that. I mean, kudos to Emo and all those guys on the team who took a step back and said, hey, maybe what we did back then was clever in 2011, but in 2017, it's not anymore, and let's do something else. And basically, they rebooted the whole thing. So the whole cross-platform compatibility approach was rebooted, which is always dangerous and courageous, right? Damien Edwards and all those people. And said, hey, let's do a different approach. And I think the approach they took now, I like it a lot better. So I think having this .NET Standard as the interface or the specification, whatever, and Core being one implementation, Xamarin is also in there, and Windows 10, and soon WPF and Windows
So what
Forms.
level of standard do you target? Like, what's the sensible one for a project like this?
So my rule of thumb, and what I tell people is, if you do an application, try to do as high as you go. So if you do a .NET Core application, try to go with 2.0 if you can, because then you can use every .NET Standard class library there is out.
Sure.
Everyone is going to be compatible, because .NET Core 2.0 is compatible with 1.5, 1.3, 1.1, etc. Yeah. So if you do an application, go as high as you can go. But if you do a class library, try to go as low as you can go. Because the class library, which supports .NET Standard 1.0, you have less APIs at your disposal. So some things you can't do. But the advantage is that your class library is automatically going to be compatible with everything.
Sure.
Right?
You're helping more people.
Exactly. And so MVVM Light is actually compatible with .NET Standard 1.0.
Wow.
And I managed to do that. I had to
I was just thinking, what did you have to give up?
I had to give up a component called the Common Service Locator, which was an external dependency. And Common Service Locator is used when you do IOC container, when you do inversion of control container. And basically, it was kind of a standard way of saying, hey, I support an interface, and like this, you can swap my IOC container with another one easily. And once I remember I talked to Damien Edwards about that, and he was like, yeah, but why would you? I mean, you would never swap anyway, right? And I'm like, maybe he has a point,
I've
right?
created a feature people don't need.
Yeah, maybe he has a point there. And it's true, because it was a great solution to a problem that nobody had.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well done. No wonder. And as long as nobody tests it, it'll work excellent.
Exactly. But back then there was a lot. I mean, we are talking 2010, 2011, right?
Sure.
I mean, back then a lot of people had this idea of, oh yeah, that's cool. Let's collaborate together and switch things up. And everybody had their own IOC container anyway. And so there was really an explosion in terms of that. And I thought, yeah, that's a good idea actually. But Common Service Locator brought a lot of problems to me. Like, first of all, it's an external dependency. So I was depending on somebody who is not me,
Yep.
who I cannot really kick in,
Yep.
in the whatever you kick them in and say, hey, work now, because they are their own people, right?
Sure.
And the other thing is that when they actually released Common Service Locator for .NET Standard, which was later than I did MVVM Light, they released it for 2.0.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't want 2.0. I wanted 1.0.
Right.
So I was like, well, sorry, but no, I'm going to just get rid of that. And so I removed it, which means it's a breaking change for my user. Mm-hmm. Which means that if you go from the standard version, the portable class library version, well,
right.
standard is a bad name.
Yeah.
From the the default version, right, to the .NET standard version, to the new version, then you're going to have maybe a few breaking changes that you need to fix because Common Service Locator is not here anymore.
Although
but you do that once, and then you're good to go.
You'll get that other Common Service Locator. You're going to be dependent at standard level 2.
Yeah, so the problem is that I cannot depend MVVM Light on Common Service Locator if I want to stay in .NET Standard 1.0. Yeah. And I want to stay in 1.0.
And again,
I want
it's only
to support
necessary
everybody.
if you care about switching out IOCs.
Yeah, which you never do anyway.
You're not going to do.
So I decided to just remove it, and the rest just works really. So yeah, the big work was done by Oren Novotny. I mean, you know Oren, right? Mm-hmm. He's an awesome guy, and when he did the work from from WPF and Silverlight and Windows Phone and all those class library versions to PCL, he had to do a lot of work. And that was what I said, right, when Microsoft reached out to me and said, hey, we want to do the work for you.
Right.
That was a lot of work. But then porting that to .NET Standard was super easy because basically it pretty much just works.
He just did the hard. He'd already done the hard work.
Yeah, totally.
So I mean, I don't think about the project on the forefront. I mean, I've been to the website. It looks very vintage.
Yeah. Well, the website, I'm not a web guy. So, at some point, Sean Wildermuth even reached out to me and said, oh my God, it's so ugly. I will redo it for you for free. And then I don't know, that kind of, it's my fault. I never got back to him because I was like, yeah, but why? I mean,
it's fine.
Well, what I want is really people, website and documentation and all that. Yeah, it's important, definitely. Mm-hmm. But I prefer do documentation in form of samples if I can. And I'm going to switch a lot of the doc to GitHub anyway, because since I'm on GitHub now, and now we do, at Microsoft, we do all the documentation on GitHub.
Yes.
So docs.microsoft.com is marked down on GitHub, right? And
I've sent corrections in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So thank you for your contribution.
Do the best I can.
But no, it is really awesome, and so I'm probably going to switch a lot of that to that. And so it doesn't make sense for me to invest a lot of time in the website because it's probably going to move to GitHub proper.
I appreciate that. Well, it's great to hear the project going so just continuing to thrive.
No, it's fun. Yeah, I have 3-point-something million download now, so it's a lot. And the curve, I kind of check from time to time, like how is the download number doing, because that's the only metric I have really, is how many people download it on NuGet or as a VS extension.
And your run of issues as tech support.
Kinda, though I have to say the move from Codeplex to GitHub was what really brought more issues. Like more, not issues, but it's a good thing. I mean, people just starting using it more and checking the code more, just because GitHub is more collaborative than Codeplex ever was. So I'm happy for that. But at the same time, that was the main thing. In terms of number of actual issues, no, I don't have many because it's pretty much it's an old project. It's established now.
It does the thing it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
Well, Laurent, super fun to talk to you.
Yeah, always. Thank you.
Appreciate going through this bit of history and continuing to be an important project. Mm-hmm. So where are folks going to see you next?
So tomorrow I'm going with you to Munich,
yes.
Right? So we'll have another edition of the Modern Web Tour in Munich. After that, I'm flying to Seattle for a CDA Summit. So it's an internal event that we have.
Right.
But after that, I'll be, this year I'll be traveling quite a lot. I'll be in Sydney for NDC. I'll be in San Diego for VS Live. In Orlando for VS Live as well, or it's called Live 360 in Orlando, but it's the same conference. And I'll be in Belgium at some point at Dev Day. I'll be in Prague for Update conference.
I think we'll get at that one as well.
Yeah, and I'll be in Singapore for the Global Xamarin Bootcamp, which is kind of modeled on the Global Azure Bootcamp, and we'll be doing a worldwide event. It's in November 10th, and that will be quite exciting because we have something like 40 or 50 locations worldwide doing a global event.
Cool.
Yeah, organized by the community, and I'm just helping by going and
pick Singapore,
there. Huh? Well, I kind of like Singapore. They have good food, and plus I know the organizer. like the guy who had the idea of doing the global Xamarin bootcamp is Ben, who is located in Singapore. And so when we started talking, I said, well, I'm in. When do I come? And he was like, well, okay, when do you have time? And so we set the date, and then we started making noise around it. Yeah.
Nice. Laurent Bugnion. Big hand for Laurent.
Thank you.
And we'll talk to you next time on .NET Rocks.
.NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Pwop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got a transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes, I'm a toy boy.